I'm Natalie Grant, 31, and for 5 years I quietly built a healthcare tech company in a garage while my family thought I was drifting with no direction. Tonight at my brother's engagement dinner, his fiancée looked across the table and said, "Wait, you're the Natalie behind Pulse Sync. Her company is buying us for over $200 million." The silence that followed. It was louder than every holiday dinner where I was the afterthought. If you've ever had to succeed in silence while they doubted you, like this video and subscribe, you're not alone. Born and raised in Newton, Massachusetts, a town where colonial homes line the streets like perfectly arranged expectations, my family wasn't just well known. They were the kind of people other families pointed to when explaining what success should look like. My father, Dr. Thomas Grant, is the surgeon hospitals call when a case gets too complicated. My mother, Carol, is a corporate attorney who's never lost in court. And then there's my older brother, Ethan, Harvard-educated first in his class, destined to become the next great medical mind. In the Grant family, excellence wasn't just encouraged. It was the air we breathed. Our house, elegant and impeccable, felt more like a resume than a home. The dinner table. That was less about meals and more about metrics. Every evening, like clockwork, my mother would lift her wine glass, glance down the table and say, "So what did everyone accomplish today?" Ethan always went first naturally. Another perfect test score, a glowing recommendation from his research mentor, and extra volunteer hours logged at the hospital. His success was expected, celebrated, and documented with framed certificates in the hallway. Then it was my turn. I remember being 15, nervously excited to share something that mattered to me. I had spent the entire weekend teaching myself HTML and CSS, building my very first website from scratch. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. "That's nice, sweetheart," my mother said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "But shouldn't you be focused on debate? Colleges want consistency, not hobbies." My father didn't even glance up. He had already turned his attention back to Ethan, asking about a biology project that wasn't due for another 3 weeks. In that moment, I learned the rules of our house. Achievement was only valid if it wore a white coat or carried a gavel. Computers, just toys. Programming, a distraction. Passion, only acceptable if it fits into a pre-approved mold. I wasn't angry then, just confused. I thought effort mattered. I thought showing initiative would count. Instead, I was gently nudged back toward the path they'd already chosen for me. So I found refuge in the quiet corners of my room. While Ethan's shelves filled with medals and framed accolades, mine held stacks of coding books, sticky notes with pseudocode and sketches of app interfaces. I stayed up late learning JavaScript tutorials online while the rest of the house slept soundly. I wasn't rebelling. I was surviving, trying to build a future I couldn't yet name. When I was 16, I built a software tool that helped streamline planning for our school's annual fundraiser, a logistical nightmare that usually took weeks to coordinate. My program reduced the time to just a few days. Mrs. Blake, the event coordinator, was amazed. She even pulled my parents aside at a school event and said, "Your daughter has real talent. She could go far in tech." My mother nodded politely. "Natalie has many interests," she replied. "But we're really focusing on her pre-law courses right now." I hadn't signed up for any pre-law courses, but it didn't matter. In their eyes, my future was already written. My role was to stay on script. And so I did what I had always done. I smiled, I nodded. And that night I went home and added another line of code to a dream no one believed in but me. Because even at 16, I understood something they didn't. If no one was going to open the door for me, I'd build the door myself. By the time I turned 17, I had stopped expecting recognition. At school, I was the girl people came to when their laptops crashed or their code wouldn't compile. At home, I was still the daughter who hadn't figured it out yet. That's how my mother put it gently but firmly when she thought I wasn't listening. Natalie's still exploring, she told a family friend once. Ethan's always known his purpose. She's getting there. But I wasn't lost. I knew exactly what I loved. I knew that when I sat in front of my computer screen, time dissolved. I knew that building software made me feel powerful and focused in a way nothing else did. I just didn't have a way to explain that to people who thought success only came in scrubs or suits. Then came the regional coding competition. I had spent months designing an inventory management system that could track, categorize, and forecast stock levels for small businesses, something my aunt, who ran a local bookstore, said would be a game changer. I built it from the ground up. Every algorithm, every interface, every line of logic. It was the most complex thing I had ever created, and for the first time in a long time, I was proud in a way I couldn't shrink. The final round of the competition was scheduled for a Saturday in early spring, the same Saturday as Ethan's medical school acceptance party. I still remember the phone call, my mother breathless with excitement. He got into Johns Hopkins. We're hosting a brunch, just family and close friends. I know your competition's the same day, but it's important, Natalie. Your brother has worked so hard for this. You understand, right? I said I did. But something in me went quiet, not angry, just hollow. That morning I got dressed alone, packed my laptop into a weathered backpack, and took the commuter rail into downtown Boston. I watched as families arrived together, moms adjusting their kids' ties, dads carrying water bottles and snacks. My name tag was crooked. No one noticed. No one was there to. But I competed. I stood in a room full of brilliant, focused students and presented my project to a panel of judges, real software engineers from real companies. And when they announced the winners, my name was called. First place. They said I had vision, clarity, and elegance in execution. One judge even asked if I'd consider an internship over the summer. I took the train home that night with the trophy tucked carefully into my backpack. My fingers still trembled from adrenaline. I walked into the house to find balloons, music, and the clinking of wine glasses. The whole place was glowing in celebration. My parents were standing in the kitchen with Ethan beaming like proud parents. Dad glanced up briefly when I stepped in. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he said as I held up the trophy. Then he turned back to Ethan and resumed his toast. That was it. No questions, no interest, no space for what I had done. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, trophy still beside me, and looked at my screen. The code I had written just days before stared back at me like an old friend. And I made a promise to myself right then, quiet but unbreakable. If they wouldn't see me for who I was, I'd build something so undeniable, so irrefutable, that they'd have no choice but to look. But more than that, more than proving them wrong, I wanted to prove myself right. Because maybe recognition is nice, but freedom, the kind that comes from choosing your path and owning it completely, that's something no applause can replace. So I stopped waiting for permission. I stopped wondering when they'd be proud. And I started planning. Not just apps or systems, but something bigger. A life they couldn't rewrite. A success they couldn't claim. A future they never saw coming. And it would start with a decision no one expected me to make. Senior year brought with it a strange kind of pressure. Not the kind that crushes you instantly, but the kind that wraps itself around you slowly, expectation by expectation, assumption by assumption, until you can't tell which part of your life is yours and which part belongs to everyone else. At the Grant household, college application season wasn't just a milestone, it was a performance. My mother had already compiled a list of schools she thought I'd appreciate: Yale, Princeton, Stanford, all with strong pre-law or pre-med programs naturally. She even arranged for me to speak with an admissions consultant from her firm's alumni circle. "It's important to keep doors open," she said, sliding a glossy Yale brochure across the table. And maybe if I hadn't won that coding competition, If I hadn't seen my own name on a plaque held in my hands instead of my brother's, maybe I would have gone along with it. Smiled, nodded, performed. But something had shifted. One evening after dinner, I told them, I've submitted applications to Northeastern Carnegie Mellon and Georgia Tech. My father didn't look up from his tablet. Those are fine schools, but they don't carry the weight of an Ivy. I'm planning to major in computer science. The silence that followed was clean, clinical. My mother's voice came next, slow and sharp. Natalie, your test scores could get you into Yale. You don't want to waste that. I remember the way she said waste, like I was pouring potential down the drain, like the hours I spent building software meant nothing, like passion was irresponsible. It's not a waste if it's what I love, I replied. My father finally looked at me. Computer science is fine for a hobby, but it's not a career. Not for someone like you. Someone like me. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. In their world, real success wore pressed suits and carried courtroom transcripts or surgical reports. What I loved didn't fit their mold. Even Ethan tried to play mediator. Maybe it's just a phase, he said with a soft laugh. Let her get it out of her system before law school. That phrase, get it out of her system, as if creativity were a rash, as if my ambition were something to be endured, not supported. But I had made up my mind. When my acceptance from Northeastern came with a full merit scholarship attached, I accepted immediately. No hesitation. The night before I left for Boston, my mother stood in the hallway holding a folded list of apartment safety tips and a reusable grocery bag filled with vitamins. Just don't forget who you are, she said quietly. I won't. I promised. But what I didn't say out loud was this. I finally know who that is. When I stepped onto campus that fall, I wasn't the daughter they pitied or the sister they underestimated. I was just Natalie. A student. A builder. A girl with a laptop, a brain full of dreams, and finally space to chase them. And for the first time, I could breathe. No more explaining why I didn't want law school. No more apologizing for preferring code to courtrooms. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. They thought I was running away from something, but I wasn't. I was running toward myself. And that decision to declaim my future instead of inheriting one was the moment everything began to change. College wasn't a fresh start. It was a liberation. At Northeastern, I no longer had to justify my interests or dim them to make room for someone else's pride. I was no longer the daughter who'd disappointed the plan. I was just Natalie Grant, another student navigating algorithms, debugging loops, and pulling late nights fueled by coffee and curiosity. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language not just technically, but emotionally. They understood what it meant to obsess over a line of code for hours. They knew the strange joy of solving a bug at 3 in the morning. They didn't ask me when I was switching to a real major. They just asked what I was building next. That's where I met Chloe Myers. It started in advanced programming structures, a brutal course with a reputation for breaking even the best students. But while most of the class struggled through the final project, Chloe and I finished it in half the time and added features just for fun. One afternoon, we grabbed coffee at a tucked-away cafe near campus, laptops open between us. The conversation started with classwork, but it didn't stay there long. The health system's broken, Chloe said one night, eyes locked on an article about diagnostic failures. My mom was misdiagnosed 3 times before they finally figured out she had lupus. They had the information. They just didn't share it. Doctors don't talk to each other. Or to patients. Not in a way that works. I listened. Not just politely, but deeply. Because even though I didn't grow up around hospitals like Chloe, I understood dysfunction masked by professionalism. I knew what it felt like to be unheard, to have your needs minimized by people who thought they knew better. So we started sketching. On napkins, whiteboards, the backs of class notes. We imagined a platform that would make communication in healthcare not just efficient but human. A system where patient data could follow you clearly and securely, where doctors could collaborate in real time, where families didn't have to beg for updates or guess what a diagnosis meant. By the end of the semester, we had the bones of it. We called it Pulse Sync. That summer, while everyone else headed home for internships or family vacations, I moved into Chloe's family garage just outside Cambridge. Her parents, kind and endlessly curious, cleared out storage boxes and brought us sandwiches during coding sprints. They asked what we were building and how they could help. The contrast with my own family was jarring. Where my parents saw my work as a phase, Chloe's parents saw possibility. Where my mother offered vitamin packs and veiled warnings, Chloe's mother brought iced tea and genuine curiosity. And in that garage, on plastic folding tables surrounded by cables and whiteboards, we started writing the code that would change our lives. We didn't have funding. We didn't have a roadmap. We just had a vision. And we had each other. We worked until our eyes blurred, slept in shifts, survived on caffeine and stubbornness. And yet, it never felt like suffering. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't proving anyone wrong. I was building something that mattered. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just the beginning of a business. It was the beginning of becoming myself. By junior year, Pulse Sync was no longer just an idea. We had a working beta, a clean, intuitive interface, secure back-end encryption, real-time updates between care providers and patients. We started entering entrepreneurship competitions, not for the attention, but for the prize money. With each win, we filed patents, paid legal fees, and slowly built a foundation. A professor introduced us to Dr. Evelyn Cole, a hospital administrator who'd spent years frustrated by communication breakdowns in her network. After a short demo, she stared at our screen like she'd just seen the future. This, she said, could actually save lives. How soon can you pilot it? We looked at each other, half in disbelief, half in awe. She became our first advisor, and then our first paying client. It should have felt like a turning point. But at home, nothing had changed. When I visited Newton for holidays or long weekends, the questions from relatives were always the same. So, Natalie, when are you switching to something more stable? What kind of job can you even get with computers? Maybe IT support. That's respectable. I learned to smile, to give vague, friendly answers that allowed the conversation to drift elsewhere. Just some software stuff, I'd say, still figuring it out. And they would nod, satisfied, as if I had confirmed their narrative that I was still trying, still unsure, still safely beneath their expectations. No one asked for details. No one knew that Chloe and I had cleared out her parents' garage and turned it into a makeshift command center. No one knew we had signed a contract with a regional health network. No one knew that a group of engineers, all older and more experienced than us, had asked for internships under our names. And part of me preferred it that way, because it was safer hiding our progress beneath their assumptions. At Thanksgiving that year, my mother cornered me near the dessert table. She had that look she always wore before making a suggestion sound like a rescue plan. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, using that united front voice that always meant resistance was useless. "We're concerned about your career path. Ethan can help you get an administrative role at his hospital. Something stable. Until you figure things out." I wanted to laugh. Not in cruelty, but in disbelief. We were figuring things out. We were building something real. We had revenue, clients, users. But to her, none of that mattered. Because it wasn't visible. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't approved. So I took a deep breath and gave the same answer I'd rehearsed in therapy. "Actually, I'm working on starting a business." She blinked, then smiled in that way that tried to be supportive, but didn't quite get there. "A business that's..." Ambitious. But you really should gain some real-world experience first. That was the last time I tried to explain my work to them. Because every word I spoke was filtered through a lens that already decided who I was and who I wasn't. And it hurt. Not because they didn't understand, but because they didn't even ask. So I stopped talking. Not out of spite, but out of protection. Some dreams are too fragile to share with people who only see limits. I went back to Boston, back to Chloe, back to the quiet chaos of building something from scratch. We moved into a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and windows that never quite closed. We lived on ramen and side gigs, building websites for local businesses to cover rent. Our first real office, a corner desk in a co-working space that we could barely afford. But it was ours. And when we sat side by side, sketching new features, fixing bugs, pitching to hospitals, we didn't feel small. We felt unstoppable. Because behind every line of code, behind every sleepless night, was the unspoken truth. We weren't just writing software. We were rewriting the story we had been told our whole lives, and we were just getting started. By the time I turned 24, Chloe and I were still living like students, except our textbooks had become pitch decks, and our study groups were now investor meetings. PulseSync was gaining traction, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. We landed a second contract, then a third. Our user base was small but growing, and the feedback we received from healthcare professionals was overwhelming. They told us our platform was solving problems they had spent years trying to fix. But my family still had no idea, and honestly, I had stopped waiting for them to ask. That Christmas, we all gathered at the Grant house. The same polished floors, the same champagne glasses, the same quiet comparisons wrapped in smiles. Ethan announced his engagement to a pharmaceutical sales executive named Madeline Hart. The room erupted in cheers. My parents beamed. My aunts leaned in with questions about wedding dates and designer gowns. Later that evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen rinsing a wine glass under the soft buzz of holiday music. My mother walked in. "You know Natalie?" she said, gently swirling the last of her Cabernet. "Ethan's friend Mark is single. He's finishing his neurology residency. I could introduce you." I looked at her. Not angry, just tired. There it was again. The unspoken message. If I couldn't become someone successful, maybe I could marry someone who was. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that PulseSync had just completed a pilot program in partnership with Dr. Cole's hospital group. Medication errors had dropped by nearly half. Patient satisfaction had soared. Medical journals were beginning to reach out. We were in talks with larger hospital networks. And one of them, Apex Care Systems, had requested a demo. That was a name we recognized. A national player. A potential game changer. And then came the email. Apex Care wanted to move forward. They were interested in an acquisition. The number was staggering. High 8 figures. A valuation that would set us up for life and scale our technology faster than we could ever do alone. We kept it quiet. Scheduled meetings with lawyers. Held negotiations through intermediaries. Chloe and I agreed we wouldn't let ego derail the deal. And then, just as the papers were circling for final review, I got a call from my mother. She sounded breathless. Delighted. "Ethan and Madeline have set a date," she said. "Labor Day weekend. But there's an engagement dinner first next month at the Vesper Room. You'll need to clear your calendar." The Vesper Room. Boston's most exclusive restaurant. Ethan, of course, had managed a reservation through one of his hospital board contacts. "That's great," I said honestly. "I'll be there." My mother hesitated, her tone suddenly more cautious. "And Natalie," she added, "it's a very upscale event. Perhaps we should go shopping for something appropriate. I noticed at Christmas your wardrobe was still collegiate." I glanced down at my silk blouse, tailored, minimal, expensive. Not that she would have known. I'll find something, I said calmly. Well, if you're sure, she replied. Madeline works in tech, actually. Some healthcare company. Horizon something. Very impressive woman. My heart skipped. Do you know her last name, Hart? Madeline Hart. I froze. Hart. From Apex Care Systems. I hung up and immediately opened LinkedIn. There she was. Madeline Hart, Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Apex Care Systems. The woman leading the negotiations to buy PulseSync was about to become my sister-in-law. The irony was sharp enough to sting. The woman my family praised for her ambition was unknowingly negotiating with the sister they thought was in tech support. In a few weeks, we would be seated across from each other at the same dinner table. Only one of us would know the truth. At least for now. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. And it was just getting started. The days leading up to Ethan and Madeline's engagement dinner felt surreal. On the surface, nothing had changed. I still answered emails, reviewed contracts, spent long hours with Chloe fine-tuning final terms with Apex Care's legal team. But under the surface, everything was shifting, because I knew what no one else in that room would know, not my parents, not my brother, and certainly not Madeline. That the woman she believed was Ethan's underachieving sister was also the founder of the company she was about to acquire. It felt like standing in the center of a joke no one else could hear. My mother called twice that week to confirm I had something appropriate to wear. My father left me a voicemail reminding me to say something impressive during dinner, something that might reflect well on the family. Madeline's parents are very accomplished, he added. Let's all try to make a good impression. Then came the call that stung the most. My mother, her voice low and careful. Natalie, we spoke with the Harts last night. They were curious about what you're doing these days. Ethan mentioned, you might be between jobs. I swallowed hard. I'm not between jobs, Mom. Well, your father and I were thinking Sophia's father knows someone at Apple. Entry-level IT. It could be a great start. Something real. Something real. They still had no idea, and they weren't interested enough to ask. That night, I called Jenna, my best friend since childhood, one of the only people who knew the truth. They're trying to set me up for a pity interview at Apple, I said, half laughing, half aching. Meanwhile, I'm finalizing a $200 million deal. Jenna didn't miss a beat. So, what's the plan? Are you going to show up in jeans and blow their minds, or walk in like a CEO and let the room rearrange itself? I considered it. Neither felt right. I'm just going to be myself, I said. No performance, no reveal. If they figure it out, they figure it out. She was quiet for a second. Then, that's powerful. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. 5 years of building something in silence had taught me this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not prove. Just exist. Fully. Unapologetically. The night of the dinner, I arrived at the Vesper room right on time. Not early enough to help, not late enough to draw attention. Just present. The hostess led me to the private dining room. Crystal chandeliers, velvet booths, gold-rimmed china. My family had already gathered. My father chatted with Mr. Hart near the bar. My mother hovered over the place cards, rearranging them like chess pieces. Ethan spotted me first. Liv, you made it. He smiled, pulled me into a quick hug, then turned me toward the window. Come meet Madeline. She was poised, elegant, polished in every way my mother adored. Madeline, this is my sister Natalie. She extended her hand warmly. Jason talks about you all the time. I smiled, though I had no idea what stories he'd told. Congratulations to both of you, I said. My mother appeared beside me, eyes scanning my dress. You found something to wear. That's nice. A pause. We seated you next to Cousin Margaret. You two always got along. Translation away from the executives. Dinner began with champagne and long-rehearsed toasts. To Ethan and Madeline, my father said, glass raised high. Our pride, our future. Every word landed like a quiet reminder of who belonged and who didn't. But then halfway through the main course, something shifted. Madeline turned to me, her brow furrowed slightly. "Forgive me," she said slowly. "But is your last name Grant?" The table quieted. "Of course it is," Ethan said confused. "She's my sister." Madeline looked at me again. Closer now. Sharper. "You're Natalie Grant, founder of Pulse Sync." I held her gaze. Yes. The silence was thunderous. Madeline's fork clinked softly against her plate. "You're the Natalie we've been negotiating with." "Well," I said gently, "you've been negotiating with my legal team." "But yes, that's me." My father froze glass halfway to his mouth. My mother touched her necklace like it might keep her grounded. Ethan's face went pale. "Is this real?" my father asked. I nodded. "We currently serve over 300 healthcare facilities. The deal with Apex Care closes next week." The room swirled with disbelief, but I sat still, calm, because I had already lived this moment 1,000 times in my mind. And now, it was finally theirs to live. The first text came in before I even got home. My mother. 3 words. "We need to talk." By morning, my phone was overflowing calls, texts, and voicemails from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everyone remembered they had always believed in me. Suddenly, everyone was proud. Ethan sent 3 separate messages, each more confused than the last. The final one was simple. "Why didn't you tell me?" And maybe he deserved an answer, but not through a screen. So I replied to only one message. My mother's. "Brunch sounds fine. The Langston, 11 a.m. When I arrived, they were already seated. My father, in his usual navy blazer, was reading something on his phone. My mother, hands neatly folded on a linen napkin, looked like she'd been waiting for hours. "Olivia," my father said as he stood awkwardly, as if unsure whether to greet me like a daughter or a guest. He settled for a hug that landed somewhere in between. "You look well." My mother was less restrained. "Darling, we have so much to discuss. I read everything this morning. About Pulse Sync, the hospitals, the funding rounds, the awards. Why would you keep this from us?" I took a breath. "I think you know why." "I certainly don't," my father said, his voice clipped. "We've always supported your pursuits." I waited as the waiter poured our coffee. Let the silence linger just long enough to make the next part land. "You never supported my pursuits. You tolerated them until they didn't fit into the picture you had in your head." My mother opened her mouth, but I kept going. "Every time I tried to tell you what I loved, what I was building, you changed the subject. Or corrected me. Or told me I should be doing something else. Something real." My father leaned forward. "We always knew you had potential. We were just pushing you to reach it." "No," I said quietly. "You were pushing me to follow your path." "There's a difference." He tried again. "Well, it worked out, didn't it? All that pushing clearly made you." "Don't," I said, not unkindly. "Don't try to take credit for something you spent years minimizing." My mother blinked, a flash of something, shame, maybe crossing her face. "We were concerned," she said. "You never shared details." "How were we supposed to know? You could have asked," I replied. "You could have listened, not to respond, not to fix, just to understand." The conversation continued through Eggs Benedict and clinking silverware, back and forth between defensiveness and silence. But something was breaking open. My mother admitted she never really understood the tech world, that it intimidated her. My father confessed that when I rejected law school, he thought I was throwing everything away. They didn't apologize, not exactly, but they didn't deny it either. And that mattered. As we stood to leave, my mother touched my arm. "We'd like to talk more. Really talk." I nodded. "We will." That evening, Ethan showed up at my apartment. No warning, just a bottle of red wine and the most sheepish look I'd ever seen on his face. "I figured we might need this," he said. We sat by the window, city lights flickering behind us. So he started, "I've been kind of a jerk." I smiled. "Kind of?" He laughed. "Okay. Very much a jerk." He stared into his glass for a long moment. "I liked being the one who made Mom and Dad proud. I think I liked that more than I should have." That honesty, so uncharacteristic for him, caught me off guard. He leaned back, sighing. "But what you've built, Nat, it's incredible. Sophia can't stop talking about your platform. You're not just successful, you're changing how hospitals work. You actually did it." "I just built what I believed in," I said. He looked at me. "Yeah. And you believed when no one else did. That's rare." We sat there for hours, talking, laughing, rediscovering something I thought we'd lost a long time ago. And as he left, he said one more thing. "I'm glad they finally see you, but I hope you know what you've done. It would have mattered even if they never did." I stood at the door for a moment after he left, and for the first time in my life, I believed it too. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. No dramatic phone calls, no sudden reinventions of family history, just small, unfamiliar shifts. My mother texted a photo of a book sitting on her nightstand, Tech Founders Under 30. She wrote, "Thought I should learn more about your world." My father emailed a link to a healthcare conference keynote and asked, "Would Pulse Sync ever speak at something like this?" The tone had changed, not perfect, not polished, but different. At our next Sunday dinner, my mother didn't comment on my outfit or offer unsolicited life advice. My father didn't try to explain my company back to me in his own words. Instead, he asked quietly but sincerely if he could see a demo of our platform. So I showed him. I pulled up the interface on my laptop, explained how a hospital used it to coordinate medication plans, reduce duplication, and flag potential interactions. He listened. Not as a skeptic, not as a parent humoring a child. He listened like a student. When I finished, he sat back and said, "That's actually brilliant." That's when I knew we'd turned a corner. The old dynamic hadn't disappeared, but it was softening, shifting into something that might one day resemble understanding. And maybe that was enough for now. Meanwhile, my relationship with Ethan had grown into something I never expected. Without the old labels, successful son, disappointing daughter, we found common ground. We were both perfectionists. Both are obsessed about details. Both were exhausted by the weight of expectations. Now we share more than DNA. We shared purpose. He told me about the frustration of hospital bureaucracy, the patients who got lost in paperwork, the near misses no one ever heard about. I told him how PulseSync was working on predictive alerts that might prevent those very errors. Instead of comparing paths, we started imagining ways they could align. He wasn't just my brother anymore. He was someone I could build with. And then there was Madeline. At work, she remained professional and sharp, leading Apex Care's acquisition process with clarity and precision. But after that dinner, something shifted between us too. We met for coffee one afternoon. Just us. No lawyers, no pretense. I was shocked, she admitted. Not just because you were Ethan's sister, but because I'd been following PulseSync for months. And somehow you never came up. It's like you built an empire in silence. I smiled. Maybe that's exactly what I needed. She paused. Your parents are trying, you know. But they've spent years writing one story. It's hard to see the plot twist when you're that deep in the script. She was right. And maybe that's where her value came in, not just as my soon-to-be sister-in-law, but as someone who could speak both languages, the one I came from. and the one I chose. In many ways, Madeline became the translator between two worlds. At family gatherings, she gently corrected my father when he tried to oversimplify what I did. She encouraged my mother to ask real questions instead of making assumptions. She wasn't fixing anything. She was just opening the door. And I realized something. Healing doesn't always come in the form of apologies or grand gestures. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, a pause before judgment, a willingness to ask instead of assume. It's the space between a question and an answer where curiosity lives. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding behind silence or waiting for permission to be proud. I was just existing, fully. And that was the most powerful kind of progress. 6 months after that unforgettable dinner at the Vesper Room, life looked entirely different. The Pulse Sync acquisition had closed exactly on schedule. The press release was everywhere: Tech Insider, Forbes, Health Innovation Weekly. For the first time, my full name was listed alongside Chloe's in bold professional font. My photo standing in front of our new office overlooking the Charles River was circulated more than I'd ever expected or honestly ever wanted. The world finally knew who I was. But more importantly, I did too. After years of keeping my success quiet out of fear, out of fatigue, I no longer needed to dim it to feel safe. But I didn't need to broadcast it either. What I needed was to live it. I stayed on with Apex Care to lead their innovation division while Chloe oversaw international rollout. Our software was being implemented in hospitals across 3 continents. The platform that began in a garage now supports healthcare systems from Seattle to Singapore. I had a corner office with tall glass windows, a team of 30 engineers, a calendar biz ooked solid for months, but my apartment still modest, still quiet, still mine. Every month we hosted a casual dinner, me, Ethan, and Madeline. Sometimes my parents joined, sometimes they didn't. But when they did, they came with less armor, less performance. At one dinner, my mother complimented the Pulse Sync interface. She even admitted, half laughing, half humbled, that she still didn't fully understand what I did, but she was proud. That word proud landed differently than it used to, because now I didn't need it to breathe. I could appreciate it without relying on it. Even my father began to soften. During one call, he asked if I might speak to a colleague's daughter who was interested in computer science. "She reminds me a bit of you," he said. "She doesn't follow the expected path, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." I didn't say much, just smiled and nodded, because sometimes progress is measured not in leaps, but in quiet recognition. The deeper shift, though, was internal. I returned to therapy not just to process the past, but to prepare for the future. "You spent years protecting yourself from judgment," Dr. Winters said. "And now that you don't need to anymore, you're learning how to live without the armor." She was right. The armor had been useful, necessary even. But I didn't want to wear it forever. So I began to build new rhythms. I joined a mentorship network for young women in STEM. Once a month, I hosted workshops at local high schools, introducing girls to programming through real-world problems. At one session, a 15-year-old asked me quietly, "What if my parents don't think tech is a real job?" I smiled, the kind of smile that knows the ache behind the question. "Then you prove it to yourself first," I said. "The rest will catch up. Or it won't. But your belief has to come first." Afterward, I sat in my car for a long while, watching the rain fall against the windshield. There was something about seeing a younger version of myself in that room, hopeful, terrified, waiting for permission, that made me realize how far I'd come. Success, I'd learned, isn't just metrics or milestones. It's not the funding round or the valuation. It's being able to look at the girl you once were and know you didn't give up on her. I no longer walked into family dinners bracing for judgment. I no longer held my breath when someone asked, "So what do you do?" I no longer needed my story to be rewritten, because I had already written a new one. One line of code at a time, one boundary at a time, one truth at a time. And now, with every room I entered, I brought my full self with me. No apology, no translation, just presence. And that was more than enough. By the time I turned 28, the noise had quieted. Not because the world had stopped watching, but because I no longer needed to perform. I was no longer trying to outrun old wounds or rewrite the past. I was simply living in the present, and for the first time, it was enough. My days were filled with meaning. Strategy meetings in the morning, coding deep dives in the afternoon, late-night brainstorms with Chloe over shared Google Docs, and bad takeout. Pulse Sync was now in over 300 hospitals. Clinical studies showed that communication errors had dropped by over 40%. Patient satisfaction scores were rising. Emergency departments were saving time and lives because of something Chloe and I had once mapped out on a coffee-stained napkin. But even as our impact grew, I found myself craving something more personal. Not validation, not applause, connection. So I began carving out time for people who saw me beyond the title. Jenna and I started meeting once a week just to be silly, just to talk about nothing, just to remember that I was still the girl who loved movie marathons and cereal at midnight. Madeline and I grew closer too. She'd pop into my office unannounced with iced coffee and spreadsheets. Some days we talked strategy, other days we talked about family. You know, she said once, settling into my office chair, your dad doesn't dismiss tech because he doubts you. He dismisses it because he doesn't understand it. And Thomas Grant doesn't like what he can't control. It was the kind of truth I had avoided for years, but somehow coming from her, it landed gently. Ethan and I had settled into a rhythm as well. No longer rivals, no longer strangers under the same roof. Now we were just siblings, flawed, funny, fiercely protective of each other. We'd trade voice notes about work, send each other articles, and every now and then argue over whose field was more complicated, medicine or technology. But the best shift, the one I didn't see coming, was at home. My parents were trying, clumsily, but trying. My mother, once obsessed with appearances, now asked real questions. She came to one of my speaking events quietly sitting in the back, and afterward told me she cried. "I didn't know what you'd built," she said. "I'm still learning how to see you." My father, who once scoffed at entrepreneurship, began referring to me as our daughter, the innovator, in conversations with colleagues. It was awkward, imperfect, sometimes still tone-deaf, but it was honest. We had built new boundaries, ones that didn't require me to shrink to fit their expectations. They still made mistakes. So did I. But now when we sat down for Sunday calls, the conversation wasn't filtered through assumption. It was guided by curiosity. And that made all the difference. Outside of family, my world had expanded. I became a mentor to younger women in STEM, hosting monthly sessions at schools and coding camps, speaking not just about the industry, but about resilience. "I know what it's like," I told one girl after class, "to feel like your path doesn't match what your family imagined." She nodded, eyes wide. "Mine still thinks computers are for boys." I smiled. So did mine. Build anyway. Those moments lit something in me. Not pride, purpose. Because maybe the point of overcoming isn't just arriving at a better place. It's reaching back, holding the door open, whispering to the next girl, "You're not alone. You're not wrong. You're just early." And in doing that, day by day, voice by voice, I realized something. I hadn't just built software. I had built strength. The kind you don't see in headlines. The kind that doesn't need a microphone. The kind that shows up quietly and stays. And for the first time in my life, I knew it was mine. One evening, not long after another product launch, I stood in my office, lights low, city, glowing beyond the windows, and thought about that girl in high school. The one who came home with a coding trophy, only to find her family raising a glass to someone else. The one who stayed up past midnight writing lines of code no one would ever see. The one who built something real in silence, just to prove she could. She would barely recognize this life. And yet I'm still her. Still building, still learning, still choosing integrity over applause. Only now I'm no longer waiting to be seen. I see myself. Pulse Sync is thriving, but more than that. I'm thriving. Not because I reached some perfect milestone, but because I stopped needing to prove anything to people who refuse to look. Now I share my story not for validation, but for someone else who might be sitting where I once was, questioning their worth, doubting their voice, waiting for permission that may never come. To them I say this: you don't need to be understood to be valuable. You don't need to be applauded to be impactful. You just need to keep going, keep building, keep choosing the version of yourself that feels the most true, even when no one claps. Especially when no one claps. As for my family, things aren't perfect. There are still moments when they stumble when I catch the old patterns returning. But now I meet them where they are. Not with bitterness, not with silence, but with boundaries and grace. Because I'm no longer asking them to make room for me. I've already made the room myself, and I've filled it with people who see me clearly, people I've chosen, people who chose me back. That's the real success. Not the headlines, not the valuation, but the peace that comes when you truly know your worth isn't up for negotiation. So if my story resonated with you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told your path wasn't enough, leave a comment and tell me how you kept going. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone quietly building something extraordinary in the shadows, share this with them. And subscribe if you want more stories about what it really means to find your way, when the world insists you should take someone else's. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Because at the end of the day, success isn't proving others wrong. It's proving to yourself that you were always right to begin.